Hello, this is Slow Night, Ancient Tales. The story I have for you tonight is an old record, one that carries a certain weight, yet gently comforts the deepest parts of the heart. It is the diary of Baekbeom Kim Koo, a man who dedicated his entire life to his country. Those restless, anxious nights spent in exile on foreign soil. The hope he never relinquished, even amidst the fear of falling bombs. And that overwhelming moment when, after many long years, he finally stepped onto the soil of his beloved homeland. As we quietly listen to these entries from a fierce, bygone era, we are reminded once again of just how precious this peaceful night we enjoy today truly is. Now tuck yourself into your warm blankets and gently close your eyes. Let go of all today's worries as we begin our slow walk together into the long, long journey of Baekbeom's story. The great river, the long wind of 10,000 li. From then on, I temporarily settled in Jiaxing. Following my parents' surname, I went by the name Chang, and I styled myself as Jingu or Jin. Jiaxing was the hometown of Mr. Chu Fu Cheng, Chu Pao Cheng, with whom I had sought refuge. Mr. Chu was a man of high virtue who had once served as the governor of Jiangsu province. His eldest son, Feng Zhang, had studied in the United States and was the chief engineer at the Minfeng paper mill located outside the East Gate. Mr. Chu's residence, situated outside the South Gate of Jiaxing, was an old-style building. While not overly grand, it had the air of a high official's mansion. Mr. Chu designated a pavilion belonging to his foster son, Chen Dongson, as my lodging. It was a neat, semi-Western style house built along the lake. It offered a beautiful view, overlooking the Shuilan silk mill. In the Chu household, only Mr. and Mrs. Chu, their son and daughter-in-law, and Mr. and Mrs. Chen Dongson knew my true identity. My greatest difficulty was my inability to speak Chinese. Although I posed as a Cantonese, there could hardly be a Cantonese so ignorant of the language. Though Jiaxing had no mountains, its lakes and canals branched out in every direction like the legs of an octopus. So even children of 7 or 8 knew how to row a boat. The land was extremely fertile and rich in resources. Unlike in Shanghai, the people were simple and honest. There was no haggling in the shops, and if a customer forgot an item, the shopkeeper would keep it safe and return it. Accompanied by Mr. and Mrs. Chen, I visited the Yanyu Pavilion on the South Lake and the 3 pagodas outside the West Gate. These sites held ruins from the Ming Dynasty, when Japanese pirates had invaded and committed atrocities. About 10 li out from the East Gate lay the tomb of Zhu Maichen of the Han Dynasty. It is said that the Luofan Pavilion outside the North Gate is where Zhu Maichen, while studying, let his grain mats float away and was subsequently forsaken by his wife, Lady Kuei. Later, when Zhu Maichen returned as the governor of Kuaiji, it is told that Lady Kuei, unable to gather back the water spilt from a basin, drowned herself beneath the Luofan Pavilion. Not long after I arrived in Jiaxing, word came from a Japanese official at the Shanghai consulate who had been bribed by our side. He warned us to be careful as they were coming to search the Huhang Railway, Shanghai-Hangzhou line. When we sent someone to the Jiaxing station to investigate, we found that a Japanese officer in disguise had indeed arrived, looked around, and departed. Consequently, it was decided that I should move to the mountain villa of the Zhu family, the in-laws of Chu Fengjiang. Mrs. Chu was the second wife of Fengjiang, a young and beautiful woman who had recently given birth to her first child. Mr. Chu entrusted me to this lady alone, and she accompanied me on a day's journey by steamship to the Zhu family residence in Haiyan County. The Zhu residence was said to be the largest house in the walled city, and indeed it was magnificent. My quarters, a Western-style building, were located in the back garden. Outside the main gate was a stone-paved road, and across the road lay a lake where boats of all sizes passed by. Inside the gate was a garden, and through a side gate was an office where the general manager of the Zhu household handled the daily affairs of the estate. In the past, 400 family members would gather in a single dining hall to eat, but now, most had dispersed to various places according to their professions: scholarship, farming, industry, or commerce. Those who remained preferred to live as small, independent families, so the office merely distributed supplies to them. The layout of the house was like a beehive. 3 or 4 buildings were assigned to one family unit. In the front was a large guest hall, followed by Western-style buildings and flower-strewn gardens, and behind those was a sports ground. There were 3 great gardens in Haiyan, and since the Qian family garden was said to be the first and the Zhu family garden the second, I visited the Qian garden as well. Truly, the Qian garden was larger than the Zhu garden, but in terms of the house and its facilities, the Zhu residence surpassed the Qian residence. After spending one night at the Zhu residence in Haiyan, I traveled the next day with Mrs. Zhu by train to Luolian. From there, we walked 5 or 6 li southwest up a mountain path. As I watched the lady, wearing high-heeled shoes and constantly wiping sweat with her handkerchief, cross the mountain pass in the scorching heat of the 7th or 8th lunar month, I felt a desperate urge to capture the scene on film, to pass down to 10,000 generations. A maid from the lady's parental home followed us, carrying my food and other daily necessities. If our nation achieves independence, how could my descendants or any of our compatriots not be grateful for this lady's devotion and kindness? Though I cannot film it, I write this to pass it down through words. At the top of the pass stood a pavilion built by the Zhu family. After resting there briefly, we walked several hundred paces down the other side to find a clean, elegant, Western-style house nestled on the mountainside. Servants guarding the house came out and greeted Mrs. Zhu respectfully. The lady took out the meat and fruit the maid had carried, gave them to the servants, and explained my dietary habits and how to cook for me. She also guided me around, meticulously setting the fees for where I might go, specifying exactly how much I should be charged for various guided trips, before returning to her parents' home in Haiyan that same day. From then on, I made it my daily task to climb the mountains. Though I had been in Shanghai for 14 years, I had never set foot outside its boundaries, let alone visited Suzhou, Hangzhou, or Nanjing, which everyone else spoke of. Now that I had the opportunity to enjoy the mountains and waters at will, my delight was boundless. This house had originally been the summer villa of Mrs. Zhu's paternal uncle. After his passing, he was buried near the house, and since then, the building had served as both a gravekeeper's hut and a ritual hall for the tomb. Being a place where a prominent family would build a villa, the scenery was quite beautiful. From the mountain, the sea stretched out before me, while to the left and right were green pines and red autumn leaves. One day, I climbed up to the Yinki Pavilion. There was a Buddhist nunnery there, and an old nun came out to greet me. Every other word she spoke was Namu Amitabha. "You have come a long way, Amitabha. Please come into the inner hall, Amitabha." It went on like this. Following her into the hermitage, I found young nuns in every room with fair skin and red lips, dressed elegantly in their robes. Holding long rosaries around their necks and short ones in their hands, they greeted me with bashful, demure glances. Behind the hermitage was a rock. It was said that if a compass were placed upon it, it would point south instead of north. When I placed the compass attached to my watch on it, it was indeed so. I suspected it was due to magnetite. One day, I went to a ferry landing by the shore to see the market, but I caught the eye of the police. Eventually, my identity became known to the local authorities. Deeming it no longer safe, I returned to Jiaxing. Back in Jiaxing, I spent almost every day on a boat, floating on the lake or traveling up and down the canals. Sometimes, I stayed in a rural village called Yanjiabin. Observing the rural villages of Jiangnan, I envied how their methods of raising silkworms, weaving, and farming rice were more advanced than those in our country. This was true not only for things introduced by Western civilization, but for traditional methods as well. I thought to myself, while our ancestors sent constant envoys during the Han, Tang, Song, Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasties, why did they fail to learn the good things of this land and only bring back the bad? They claimed that adopting Chinese dress and culture was the policy of the 500 years of the Joseon dynasty. But all they brought back were the suffocating horsehair headbands and other things that lead to ruin. There was nothing regarding practical welfare or the enrichment of the people. And what was ingrained in the minds of our nation but the sycophantic ideology of serving the great? The result of developing Neo-Confucianism, even more than Zhu Xi himself, was that people sat with folded arms, not moving a finger, but only wagging their tongues, exhausting the vitality of the nation. All that remained were narrow-minded factional strifes and a spirit of dependency. Looking at today, some of our youth have lost their spirit, taking Russia as their motherland and Lenin as the father of their nation. They claimed that the national revolution thus far was a movement of double bloodshed and shouted for an immediate socialist revolution. Yet, at a single word from Lenin, have they not suddenly come forward as if the national revolution were their true goal? It is a pathetic sight to see young people who find even Lenin's dung sweet, much like those who once thought even the flatulence of Master Zhu Xi was fragrant. I do not necessarily say Zhu Xi was right, nor do I say Marx was wrong. What I ask of you, the youth, is not to lose yourselves. Think of a country that fits our historical ideals, our national character, and our environment. Do not lose yourselves day and night, exalting others and priding yourselves on following in their footsteps. Think with your own brains, with your own spirit. I moved from Yanjiabin to the house of Hangseop at Shijiaojiao, and then to the house of Chen Dongsen at Wulong Bridge. My daily routine was to take a boat rowed by a woman named Zhou Aibao and travel through various canals to see the countryside. The Zhenming Temple within the walls of Jiaxing is said to be the site of the residence of the famous Fan Li, Tao Zhugong. Inside, there was a place where 5 cows were raised and a pond for rearing fish. Outside the temple gate stood a stone monument marking the ruins of Fan Li's estate. One day, while walking about, I saw people watching soldiers drilling in a yard by the main road. I joined the crowd, but an officer noticed me, approached, and asked who I was. I replied, as I always did, that I was Cantonese. Who would have known that this officer was actually Cantonese? I was immediately taken to the headquarters of the Security Preservation Corps. Following an investigation into the Chu and Chen households, I was released, but Chu Fengzhang reproached me for not knowing how to hide. He advised me to marry a widow he knew, a middle school teacher, and live in disguise. I felt that living with such an educated woman would make it even easier for my true identity to be revealed. Instead, I decided to entrust myself to the uneducated boatwoman, Zhou Aibao, and live entirely on her boat. One day we would sleep by the lake outside the south gate, the next by the canal outside the north gate, and during the day I would walk on land. During this time, Park Nampa, Ilpa, the pseudonym of Hangseop, and An Sinam were constantly engaged in gathering diplomatic intelligence. Thanks to the sympathy of Chinese friends and the support of our compatriots in America, we had no difficulty with operational expenses. Because Park Nampa was a member of the Chinese Kuomintang, he was acquainted with Chen Guofu, the head of the party's organization department and chairman of Jiangsu province. Through his introduction, I received notice that General Chiang Kai-shek wished to meet me. I went to Nanjing accompanied by An Gonggin and Hangseop. High officials like Gong Paicheng and Xiao Zheng represent Mr. Chen Guofu in greeting me, and we were lodged at the Central Hotel. The following night, we took Mr. Chen Guofu's car to General Chiang Kai-shek's residence within the grounds of the Central Military Academy. Park Nampa came along as an interpreter. Mr. Chiang, dressed in Chinese attire, received me with a gentle countenance. After the greetings, Chairman Chiang said in a brief and clear tone, "It would be best for the various peoples of the East to practice democratic politics in accordance with the 3 principles of the people advocated by Mr. Sun Yat-sen." I replied that it was so, and added, "The demonic hand of Japan's continental invasion is encroaching upon China moment by moment. If you would dismiss your attendants, I have a few words to share in writing." Mr. Chiang said, How, good," and Chen Guofu and Park Nampa withdrew. I took up a brush and wrote, "If you would grant me 1,000,000 gold, I will stir up a storm in Japan, Korea, and Manchuria within 2 years and sever the bridge of Japan's continental invasion. What do you think of this?" After reading it, Mr. Chiang took the brush and wrote, "I request that you present a detailed plan." I then took my leave. The next day I prepared a brief plan and presented it to Chairman Chiang. Mr. Chen Guofu invited me to his villa for a banquet and relayed Chairman Chiang's thoughts to me. He suggested that for special operations, even if one emperor is killed, there is another. If one general is killed, there is another. Instead, he asked how I would feel about training military officers for a future war of independence. I replied that this was my heart's deepest desire. Thus, it was decided to use the Luoyang branch of the military academy in Henan province as a training center for our compatriots. We recruited over 100 young men from Beiping, Tianjin, Shanghai, and Nanjing. We also invited Yi Chongcheon and Yi Bomsok from Manchuria to serve as instructors and officers. However, this military academy was closed by the Nanjing government after the graduation of the first class due to protests from the Japanese consul, Suma Yakichiro. At this time, something called the United Front Against Japan was initiated, and discussions of unification arose once more. Kim Won-bong specifically requested to meet me, so we met one day at Qinhuai. He said that he would participate in the unification movement and asked me to join as well. Since his motive for joining was less about unification and more about avoiding the suspicion among the Chinese that he was a communist, I declined. I told him that while unification is good, I could not participate in a movement where people share the same bed but dream different dreams. Sometime later, the so-called five-party unification conference was held. The Wiolden, the Sinan Independence Party, the Joseon Revolutionary Party, the Korean Independence Party, and the Korean Independence League in America unified to form the Joseon National Revolutionary Party. Kim Won-bong and Kim Do-bong of the Wiolden, who were the leaders of this unification, hated the provisional government like a thorn in their eye and vehemently insisted on its dissolution. Among the 7 state councilors of the provisional government at the time, Kim Koo-sik, Jo So-ang, Choi Dong-oh, Song Byung-jo, Cha Yi-sok, Yang Gi-tak, and Yu Dong-yeol, all except Cha Yi-sok and Song Byung-jo, were intoxicated by the word unification and showed indifference toward the provisional government. Kim Do-bong, seizing the chance, went to Hangzhou, the seat of the provisional government, and sternly insisted to Cha and Song that since the 5 parties had unified, the provisional government, which remained in name only, should be abolished. However, Song and Cha stubbornly resisted and guarded the nameplate of the provisional government. Nevertheless, with 5 out of 7 members gone, no cabinet meetings could be held, and it was effective, in a state of anarchy. My brother Cho Wang-gu informed me of this situation by letter, and I, filled with indignation, rushed to Hangzhou immediately. By then, Kim Chul had already passed away, and Jo So-ang, who had participated in the 5-party unification, had already withdrawn. I consulted with Yi Si-young, Cho Wang-gu, Kim Bong-jun, Yang So-byuk, Song Wang-jo, and Cha Yi-sok regarding the maintenance of the provisional government. Finding ourselves in agreement, we all went to Jiaxing. We joined Yi Dong-young, An Gong-gun, An Gyeong-gun, and Hang-seop, rented a pleasure boat on South Lake, and held an assembly on the water. We elected 3 more state councilors, Yi Dong-young, Cho Wang-gu, and Kim Koo. With Song Byung-jo and Cha Yi-sok, there were now 5 state councilors, making it possible to proceed with cabinet meetings. When the talk of 5-party unification first began, many comrades insisted on organizing a single organization, but I had consistently opposed it, as I did not wish to create yet another group and increase factional strife. However, to maintain the provisional government, an organization to serve as its background was necessary. Furthermore, since Jo So-ang was already rebuilding the Korean Independence Party, I felt that even if I organized a new group, I would not bear the responsibility for destroying unification. Thus, with the approval of my comrades, we organized the Korean National Party. I returned to Nanjing, but the Japanese caught wind of my presence. They demanded that the Chinese authorities arrest me while simultaneously sending assassination squads to seek my life. Gu Zhenglun, the garrison commander of Nanjing, met me in person and said that the Japanese were coming to arrest the traitor Kim Koo. He told me he had replied that if he caught Kim Koo, he should be given the reward the Japanese had posted, so he warned me to be careful. I also heard that 7 Japanese plainclothes officers were roaming near the Fuzimiao area. Realizing that my safety was at risk, even in Nanjing, I obtained a house at Huaiqing Bridge. I brought Zhou Aibao, who had rowed for me in Jiaxing, and lived with her, paying her 15 yuan a month. I posed as a second-hand dealer from Hainan Island, Guangdong Province. Even if the police came for a household survey, Zhou Aibao would step forward to explain, so there was no need for me to reveal my true identity. When the Marco Polo Bridge incident occurred, China began its resistance against Japan. Consequently, the sentiment of the Koreans residing there became very unsettled. The National Revolutionary Party, which had been formed by the five-party unification, split apart. The Joseon Revolutionary Party was newly formed, and the Korean Independence League in America withdrew. Only the original members of the Wyeoldan kept the name of the National Revolutionary Party. The reason for this split was that the Wyeoldan members were practicing communism under the mask of a national movement. While the National Revolutionary Party was splitting, a union of nationalists was formed. The Korean National Party, the Joseon Revolutionary Party, the Korean Independence Party, and all patriotic organizations in America and Hawaii joined together to support the provisional government. Thus, the provisional government gradually gained strength. The Second Sino-Japanese War reached Jiangnan, and the battle in Shanghai grew increasingly unfavorable for China. The Japanese Air Force's bombing of Nanjing also became more severe. The house I was in at Waiqing Bridge was destroyed in a bombing, but Zhou Aibao and I narrowly escaped death, while the neighborhood was strewn with corpses. When I stepped out, fires were breaking out all over Nanjing, and the night sky was like red felt. Waiting for dawn, I picked my way through the ruined houses and scattered bodies to the house on Malu where my mother lived. Mother opened the door herself. When I told her Shes, he must have been startled, she said. Why should I be startled? The bed was just shaking a bit. Then she asked, Are our people unharmed? I immediately went to check on our compatriots. The students living in Nanjiga were all safe. As the situation in Nanjing became dangerous and the government agencies were moving to Chongqing, we decided that the large family of over 100 people from our three parties in the Gwangbok front should evacuate to Changsha, where prices were lower. I gave instructions for the comrades in Shanghai and Hangzhou to gather in Nanjing. I sent a similar message to Yang Gitak, who was studying Taoism at Godong-am in Liang. I sent An Gonggun to Shanghai to bring his family, strictly enjoining him to bring the widow of the late martyr An Zhonggun. When An Gonggun returned, I saw that he had brought only his own family and not Mrs. Anne. I rebuked him severely. When a noble house catches fire, the first thing one does is embrace and carry out the ancestral tablets. How can a revolutionary, while evacuating, leave behind in the enemy lines the wife of a martyr who gave his life for the country? This is not just the fault of An Gonggun's family. It is a violation of a revolutionary's morality and a shame to our nation. Since An Gonggun did not wish to join the group of evacuating compatriots, I left him to his own devices. I summoned my son Sin, who was attending Dunshi Middle School in Anhui, and taking my mother, I went to Hankou on a British steamship. The large family of over 100 people left Nanjing on 2 Chinese wooden boats, loaded heavily with luggage. With mother and Sin, I traveled through Hankou and safely arrived in Changsha. Zhou Songwan and Cho Wanggu, who had left Zhenjiang as the advance party with the provisional government's archives, arrived a few days before those from Nanjing. The large family coming by wooden boat also reached Changsha safely, though they had encountered storms. It was regrettable that a Chinese man named Mr. Kai, who worked at the Nanjiga office, slipped and drowned while drawing water during a storm near Wuhu. He was included in the party because mother had ordered us to take him, saying he was a faithful man. When I left Nanjing, I sent Zhou Aibao, who had been with me, back to her home in Jiaxing. What I have regretted ever since is that I gave her only 100 yuan for her travel expenses. She had served me for nearly 5 years, knowing me only as a Cantonese, and a relationship akin to that of a husband and wife had unknowingly formed between us. Truly, her service to me was not small. Expecting that we would have a chance to meet again, I failed to give her more than her travel money, and that is a matter of profound regret. An Gonggun's family went to Chongqing, but the 100 or so family members gathered in Changsha did not know how to live a communal life, so each family found a room and cooked for themselves. I, too, began a household with my mother and ate the food she prepared with her own hands. But as I write this today, mother is no longer in this world. If she were here, I would have asked her about past events and dates, just as I did when writing the first volume. But now mother is gone. At this point, I shall record how mother went back to our home country after I lost my wife and then came back to me. When mother landed at Incheon with my son Sin, they had run out of travel money. At that time, we were so poor in Shanghai that mother would scavenge cabbage leaves discarded by Chinese people in trash cans to make side dishes, so there was no way I could have given her ample travel funds. Though I had never told her to do so, mother, having run out of money in Incheon, went to the branch office of the Donghailbo and explained her situation. The branch office said they already knew of her return through newspaper reports and bought her a train ticket to Seoul. In Seoul, mother went to the Donghailbo headquarters, and they bought her a ticket to Sariwon. Mother did not seek out the ancestral graves or relatives in her home of Haeju, but stayed in a house prepared in advance by the Kim clan of Anak. While I was with my son mother saved from her living expenses and occasionally sent me money. When the incidents involving the two martyrs, Yi Bongchang and Yoon Bong-gil, occurred, I heard that the police were often harassing mother. I sent word to her to come to China with the children. I told her then that I had the strength to ensure she would not go hungry. Mother resolved to come to China and went to the Anak police station herself to request an exit permit. Surprisingly, they said it was fine, so she began to pack up her household. Then an official from the Gyeongmu Bureau in Seoul came all the way to Anak and said to mother, "How can an old woman find a son whom even the police cannot find? Therefore, the exit permit is cancelled." Mother flew into a great rage and said, "I will be better at finding my son than the police. And having given me permission to go and letting me sell all my household goods, what kind of law is it that now says I cannot go? Do you think that after you rascals have stolen another's country and governed like this, you will last long?" She then fainted. At this, the police left her in the care of the Kim family and went away. Afterward, whenever the police asked, mother would say, "I will not set out on such a troublesome journey." She then called a carpenter to repair the house and prepared new household goods, making it appear as though she would live there for a long time. After several months of this, mother, claiming she was going to see her younger brother Songhua, moved in stages with Sin to Sincheon, Cheryong, and Sariwon. She arrived in Pyongyang and took In, who was attending Songsil Middle School, on a direct train to Andong-hyun. She was interrogated by the Japanese police in Dalian, but In replied that he was taking his old grandmother to a relative's house in Wei Highway, and they passed through safely. When I heard in Nanjing that mother had arrived at Hangsop's house in Jiaxing via An Gonggen's house in Shanghai, I immediately rushed to Jiaxing. After 9 years, mother and son met once again. As soon as she saw me, mother spoke these unexpected words: "From now on, I will not call you thou, but you, the formal Jane. And though I may rebuke you with words, I will not beat you with a rod. I hear that you have established a military academy and are educating young men, so it seems you have become a teacher to others. I shall respect your dignity." I was overwhelmed by this command from mother and considered it a great grace. I arranged for mother to live in a separate house in Nanjing. But in less than a year, we had to go to Changsha. This happened while mother was in Nanjing. Sensing that the youth group and the elderly comrades were planning a birthday banquet for her, she told them to give her the money instead. She would make the food she wanted to eat. The organizers gave her the money, as she requested. Mother then used that money to buy 2 pistols and presented them, saying they should be used for the independence movement. Our large family of over 100 people who had moved to Changsha had no difficulty in living due to the subsidies from the Chinese central government and support from our compatriots in America. As refugees, we lived as what might be called high-class refugees. Furthermore, Changsha was abundant in grain, and prices were very low, and General Zhang Jizhong, the newly appointed vice chairman of Hunan province, was an old acquaintance of mine. So he provided us with many conveniences. In Shanghai, Hangzhou, and Nanjing, I had used aliases except on special occasions, but in Changsha, I always went by the name Kim Koo. The issue of the 3-party merger, which had been discussed since we were on the road, progressed even more actively once we reached Changsha. The lineups of the 3 parties seeking to merge were as follows. First was the Joseon Revolutionary Party, centered on Yi Chong-cheon, Yu Dong-yeol, Choi Dong-oh, Kim Hak-gyu, Hwang Hak-soo, Yi Bok-won, An Il-chung, Hyun Ik-chol, and others. Second was the Korean Independence Party, whose executives were Jo So-ang, Hong Jin, and Jo Si-won. Third was the Korean National Party, which I had founded, with Yi Dong-young, Yi Si-young, Cho Won-gu, Cha Yi-seok, Song Byung-jo, Kim Byung-jun, Hang-seop, An Gong-gyeon, Yang Muk, Min Byung-gil, Son Il-min, and Jo Sung-hwan as its central figures. The three parties met at Namokcheong, the headquarters of the Joseon Revolutionary Party, to discuss the unification issue, and I was present there. When I regained consciousness, I seemed to be in a hospital. When I asked what had happened, I was told that I had fainted while drunk and had been hospitalized. When the doctor made his rounds, he noticed a wound on my chest. When asked what it was, he said it was from when I hit my chest against the head of the bed as I fainted. I believed this and lay in my sickbed. Only after a month did Hang-seop finally explain the truth to me. It was as follows. That night, Yi Eun-han, a member of the Joseon Revolutionary Party who had once received financial help from me while I was in Nanjing, claiming he was going to Shanghai for special operations, burst into the hall and fired his pistol wildly. I was hit by the first shot, Hyun Ik-chol by the second, and Yu Dong-yeol by the third, all seriously wounded. Yi Chong-cheon was slightly wounded by the fourth shot. Hyun Ik-chol died as soon as he reached the hospital, while Yu Dong-yeol's treatment was progressing well. The culprit, Yi Eun-han, was immediately arrested at a small station in the suburbs of Changsha. Kang Chang-jae and Park Chang-se were also caught as accomplices, but Kang and Park were released, and Yi Eun-han escaped from prison and fled. Chairman Jang Ji-jong personally visited me at the Shangya Hospital and told the hospital authorities that the provincial government would cover whatever the treatment cost. Chairman Chiang Kai-shek, who was in Hankou at the time, asked about my condition 2 or 3 times a day through intelligence reports. Upon hearing of my discharge, he sent Nahacheon as his representative to give me 3,000 yuan for my recovery expenses. When I was discharged and went to see Mother, she said, "I know that God is protecting your life. Evil cannot overcome the righteous." She also said, "To be shot by a Korean and live is not as good as being shot by a Japanese and dying." Initially, my wound was so severe that the doctor at the hospital saw it and said there was no need even for the admission process. I was left in a gatehouse room, waiting only for death. When I was still alive after 4 hours, I was moved to a hospital room and treatment began. Because of my condition, a telegram was sent to my son In, who was in Hong Kong, saying that I had been shot and killed, and Gonggun rushed there with In, intending to participate in my funeral. As the danger of war spread to Changsha, the provincial government did not have the leisure to legally investigate the incident to the end. My suspicion is that Yi Eun-han did such a thing after being misled by the malicious propaganda of Kang Chang-jae and Park Chang-se. While I was recuperating at Hang-seop's house after being discharged, I suddenly felt unwell one day, became nauseous, and my right leg became paralyzed. I went back to Shangya Hospital for an examination. After looking at the X-rays, the Western Chief of Surgery said that the bullet lodged near my heart had moved through a blood vessel to the side of my right rib. He said that if it were uncomfortable, it would not be difficult to operate, but leaving it as it was would not affect my life. He also said that the paralysis of my right leg was because the bullet was pressing on a major blood vessel, but once smaller vessels expanded to take over the function of the compressed vessel, the paralysis would gradually improve. Meanwhile, as Changsha also became dangerous, the 100 or so members of our 3 parties moved to Guangzhou. Chairman Zhang Jijong of Hunan had introduced us to Mr. Wu Ticheng, the chairman of Guangdong Province. In Guangzhou, through the mediation of our compatriots, Yi Jun-sik and Che Wan-ge, who were in the Chinese army, we used Dongshan Baiyuan as the provisional government's headquarters and the Asia Hotel as the lodging for our large family. Having settled the government and the family, I went to Hong Kong again to plan the escape of Martyr Ann's widow and family from Shanghai. I met the brothers An Jong-gun and An Gong-gun and strongly insisted on it, but they would not listen, citing the difficulty of transportation. In fact, under the circumstances of that time, it was difficult. It is a regret that I left the bereaved family of martyr An in the enemy's hands and failed to rescue Yang Yitak, who was studying Taoism under the Chinese master Lim Hanzhong at Godong Am in Liang. After staying in Hong Kong for 2 days, I returned to Guangzhou, where the Japanese bombing had begun. I once again moved mother and our large family to Foshan. This was due to the favor and arrangement of Chairman Wu Ticheng. After spending 2 months in Guangzhou like this, I requested Chairman Chiang Kai-shek for us to go to Chongqing as well. When the reply came telling us to come, I took my 2 comrades, Zhou Songwan and Na Te-seop, and went back to Changsha. I negotiated with Chairman Zhang Jizhong and obtained 3 official travel tickets and a letter of introduction to Mr. Wu Dingchang, the chairman of Guizhou Province. I set out for Chongqing and arrived in Guiyang, the capital of Guizhou Province, after 10 days. The China I had seen until then was only in regions rich in resources, but upon entering the borders of Guizhou, all I saw was poverty. Looking at the people passing by in the city of Guiyang, with very few exceptions, everyone was in rags and had a sickly complexion. Not only was the region mountainous, but the mountains were all rock, with little soil, so farmers had to spread soil over the rocks to sow seeds. Among them, the Han people were somewhat better off, but the life of the indigenous Miao people seemed even more destitute and primitive. Not knowing Chinese, I could not distinguish between the Han and the Miao by hearing their speech, but I could tell the Miao women by their dress and point out the Miao men by the look in their eyes. There was a light of culture in the eyes of the Han, but it was absent in the eyes of the Miao. The Miao are descendants of the San Miao people from the era of Yao and Shun. What kind of karma from a past life is it that they have lived such an unsightly life for 4,000 years? Since the era of Yao and Shun, the name of the Miao has not reappeared in history, so I thought they had all been exterminated. But finding that the Miao, split into dozens or hundreds of tribes, are spread throughout Hunan, Guangdong, Guangxi, Yunnan, Guizhou, Sichuan, and Xigong, the reason there is no news of them is that no great person has emerged among them. There are rumors that the 2 generals, Bai Chongxi of Guangxi and Long Yun of Yunnan, are of Miao descent, but I have no materials to judge the truth or falsehood of that. After staying in Guiyang for 8 days, I arrived safely in Chongqing, but during that time, Guangzhou was occupied by the Japanese army. While I was anxious for news of our large family, I was relieved to receive a telegram saying they had all safely escaped Guangzhou and were in Liuzhou. Since they all wished to come to Chongqing, I negotiated with the Ministry of Communications and the party's central headquarters and obtained 6 cars to move the large family to a place called Qijiang. At a time when cars were extremely scarce even for transporting military supplies, the kindness of China in lending them like this is something for which I cannot express enough gratitude. While I was at the post office waiting for a communication from America, In arrived. He had brought mother from Liuzhou because her illness was severe and she wished to come to Chongqing. I rushed following In, and mother had arrived across from my hotel, the Hongbin hostel at Chuchimen. I immediately brought her to my hotel to spend a night, and then had her stay at the house of Kim Hongseo at Sunjia Garden in Agongbu on the south side of the river. This was at the kind invitation of Kim Hongseo. Mother's illness was a throat infection. The doctor said it was a water and soil disease of Guangxi. If she were a young person, surgery could be performed, but for an old person like mother, it could not be done, and the time for treatment had already passed. Regarding mother's coming to Chongqing, there are benefactors I cannot forget, the Dr. Yu Dongjin and his wife Kang Yongpa. This couple had been supportive of me since they were students in Shanghai. They had closed the sanatorium they were running in Guling and come to Chongqing to take my place and care for my mother. However, by the time Dr. Yu and his wife arrived, it was already beyond the point where anything could be done for mother. There were 3 things I had to do upon coming to Chongqing. First was to obtain cars and bring the large family. Second was to contact America and Hawaii to receive financial support. And third was to complete the unification of the various organizations, which had been discussed since Changsha but not achieved. Since the large family was settled and contact with America was established, I set out on the third task, organization unification. In Chongqing, I visited the headquarters of the Joseon Volunteer Corps and the National Revolutionary Party across the river in Agongbu. Their leader Kim Yaxel, Kim Wonbong, was in Guilin, but the executives Yoon Gi-sup, Song Ju-sik, Kim Hong-seo, Seok-jong, Kim Du-bong, Choi Seok-sun, and Kim Sang-deok held a welcome party for me. At that meeting, I proposed that all organizations should unify to form a single nationalist party. Everyone there unanimously agreed, and they further resolved to invite the various organizations in America and Hawaii to participate. A reply came soon from America and Hawaii. They agreed to unification, but since Kim Yaxel was a communist, they said that if I worked with him, they would sever their relationship even with me. So, after consulting with Kim Yaxel, he and I issued a joint statement to the effect that a national movement is indeed necessary for the liberation of the motherland. However, an unexpected obstacle arose here. The executives of the National Party were in favor of a unification done as an alliance, but they opposed dissolving the existing party and organizing a single party that included communists. The reason was that those with different ideologies could not possibly maintain a single organization. Despite my illness, I went to Zhejiang and held a general meeting of the National Party. After a month of effort, I finally obtained the agreement of the National Party to unify all parties into a single party. Thus, the 7-party unification conference was held, consisting of the nationalist camp, the Korean National Party, the Korean Independence Party, and the Joseon Revolutionary Party, and the Communist Front, the Joseon National Revolutionary Party, the Joseon National Liberation League, the Joseon National Vanguard League, and the Joseon Revolutionary League. As the meeting progressed and the tide turned toward the nationalist side, the Liberation League and the Vanguard League stated they could not dissolve their communist organizations for the sake of the national movement and withdrew. Thus, the 7 parties were reduced to 5. He organized a new, purely nationalist party, and the leaders of the 5 parties signed an 8-point agreement. With the unification of the 5 parties of the left and right successful, I was resting for a few days. Then, Kim Yaxel, the representative of the National Revolutionary Party, which should have already been dissolved, suddenly declared his withdrawal. The reason was that the party executives and the Youth Volunteer Corps he led could not give up communism under any circumstances. So if the 8-point agreement were not revised, they would all run away. Thus, the 5-party unification failed. I apologized for my lack of wisdom to my comrades of the 3 nationalist parties and the various organizations in America and Hawaii. Subsequently, the 3 parties in the Far East unified to form the new Korean Independence Party. As the Hawaii Patriotic Association and the Hawaii Unity Association each dissolved and became the Hawaii branch of the Korean Independence Party, the 5-party unification was, in effect, achieved. The executives of the newly formed Korean Independence Party were Executive Chairman Kim Koo, members Hong Jin, Jo Soang, Yi Chong-cheon, Kim Hak-yu, Yu Dong-yeol, An Hun, Song Byung-jo, Cho Wang-gu, Hang-seop, Kim Bong-jun, Yang Muk, Jo Sung-hwan, Cha Yi-seok, and Yi Bak-won. The inspection chairman was Yi Dong-young, and the members were Yi Si-young, Gong Jin-won, and Kim Wee-han. The Provisional Legislative Assembly nominated me as the chairman of the State Council. We revised the previous system where state councilors took turns serving as chairman, allowing the chairman to take responsibility for domestic and foreign affairs. We also established diplomatic commissions in America, Seoul, and Washington, and appointed Dr. Syngman Rhee as the chairman. Meanwhile, the Chinese central government built 3 tiled houses above the Dongan waterfall in Tuqiao for our large family and gave us 1 house in the city, but they were cold toward our request for aid for our independence movement. Feeling it was too much to ask for aid at a time when China was preoccupied with its own resistance after losing many major cities to the Japanese army, I requested a passport, stating my intention to go to America and ask for American aid. At this, Mr. Xu Enzeng of the central government said that since I had been in China for a long time, would it not be good to leave some work done in China? He asked me to submit a business plan. I submitted a plan to organize the Restoration Army, Gwangbokgun, which would be the foundation of the national army of a future independent Korea, and a positive reply came immediately. Thereupon, the provisional government appointed Yi Cheong-chon as the commander-in-chief of the Restoration Army. Using all the available funds, 40,000 yuan sent by our compatriots in America and Hawaii, we invited important Chinese and Western figures to the Jialing guest house in Chongqing and held the ceremony for the establishment of the Korean Restoration Army. First, we sent about 30 executives to Xi'an to join Zhou Song-hwan and others who had gone ahead. We placed the Restoration Army headquarters in Xi'an, with Yi Beom-sok as the first detachment commander, and sent him to the Shanxi region, Ko Eun-gi, real name Gong Jin-won, as the second detachment commander, and sent him to the Suyuan region, and Kim Hak-gyu as the third detachment commander, and sent him to Shandong. We appointed Kim Mun-ho, a man from Haeju, Hwanghae Province, who was working in the political department of the 3rd War Zone headquarters of the Zhuanjin, as the head of the 3rd Recruitment Office of the Korean Restoration Army in Shangrao, Jiangxi Province. Under him, Sin Jung-suk was appointed as the accounting chief, Yi Ji-il as the intelligence chief, and Han Do-myung as the training chief, and they were dispatched to Shangrao. All the expenses for the Independence Party, the Provisional Government, and the Restoration Army were covered by the money sent by our compatriots in America, Mexico, and Hawaii. There was a donation of 100,000 Chinese yuan from the Women's Comfort Association, represented by Madam Chiang Kai-shek, Sung Mei-ling. The Restoration Army was established in this way, but with few personnel. It spent several months in name only. Then, an incident occurred. 50 young men, with the taigoki pinned to their chests and singing the national anthem, entered the government building of the Provisional Government in Chongqing. These were our university students, who had sought out the 3rd Detachment of the Restoration Army in Fuyang, and Detachment Commander Kim Hak-gyu had sent them to the Provisional Government. This fact deeply moved the Chinese people, and a welcome party was held at the restaurant of the China-Korea Cultural Association. Foreign correspondents and embassy officials were also present, and asked our student soldiers various questions. Hearing their words that they, having received Japanese education since childhood and not even knowing their national language well, had risked the danger of execution to seek out the provisional government to give their lives for the independence of their motherland, our compatriots were, needless to say, choked with emotion, and the foreigners also seemed overwhelmed with feeling. Through this connection, our Restoration Army caught the attention of the Allied forces. Dr. Sargent, who was in charge of the American OSS, Office of Strategic Services, cooperated with the 2nd Detachment Commander Yi Beom-sok in Xi'an, and Lieutenant Worms cooperated with the 3rd Detachment Commander Kim Hak-gyu in Fuyang to conduct secret training for our Restoration Army. When the scheduled 3 months of training were completed, and preparations were made to secretly dispatch them to our home country with missions of reconnaissance and sabotage, I flew to Xi'an on an American plane to have a military consultation with General Donovan, the American Director of Operations. The meeting was held in the office of the 2nd Detachment headquarters. Below the Taiguchi on the front right sat I and the executives of the 2nd Detachment, and below the American flag on the left sat General Donovan and the American instructors. General Donovan stood up and declared, "From today, the secret operation between the United States of America and the Provisional Government of the Republic of Korea to resist our enemy, Japan, begins." As General Donovan and I stepped out through the main gate, there was motion picture filming, and the ceremony ended. The next day, at the request of the American officers, it was decided to test the actual operations of the trained students, and we drove to Duke, 40 li southeast, to Zhongnan Mountain, famous in old Han poetry. We left the cars at the mouth of the valley and walked about 5 li to find an old temple. This was the secret training camp where our young men had been trained. There we had lunch in American military style and ate melons and watermelons. The first thing we saw was the selection of those skilled in adventure, based on psychology, those skilled in reconnaissance through wisdom, and those skilled in wireless telegraphy through sharp eyes and ears. The psychologist who conducted this test concluded that Korean youth are superior in both courage and intelligence, and that there is great hope for the future. Next, 7 young men were chosen, and each was given a length of hemp rope. They were tested to descend to the bottom of a cliff several hundred feet deep, pick a leaf, and return. The 7 young men gathered briefly to consult, then joined their hemp ropes to make one long rope. They tied one end to a rock, and holding onto that rope, all 7 descended, picked a leaf and held it in their mouths, then clung to the rope again, and all 7 came up one by one. The examiner saw this and praised them greatly. He said, "I gathered 400 Chinese students and had them do it, but they could not solve the problem that these 7 Korean youths have performed magnificently. Truly, the Korean people are a nation with a bright future." I was very happy when the 7 young men received this praise. Next, we tested demolition skills, marksmanship, and the skill of secretly crossing a river. Seeing that they all obtained good results, I was satisfied and returned to Duke that day. The next day, I went into Xi'an with the intention of visiting Chinese friends. From Duke to Xi'an was 40 li. General Hu Zongnan was out, so I only met the chief of staff. Chairman Zhu Xiaozhou was a close friend of mine, so we agreed to have dinner at his private residence the next day. The provincial party headquarters said they would hold a welcome party for me. The Xi'an Women's Association said they had specially prepared a play. Each newspaper office in Xi'an also sent invitations for me to attend welcome parties. I spent that night at the house of our compatriot Mr. Kim Jong-man. The next day I saw most of the famous sights in Xi'an, and in the evening, as promised yesterday, I was invited to dinner at Chairman Zhu's house. After finishing the meal, while we were in the guest room eating watermelon and conversing, suddenly a telephone rang. Chairman Zhu seemed surprised, stood up, and said, "There must be some news from Chongqing." He went to the telephone room and a moment later rushed out, saying, "The Japanese enemy is surrendering! Ah, the Japanese enemy surrendering!" To me, this was not so much joyful news as it was like the sky falling. All the effort over several years, through all kinds of hardships to prepare for participation in the war, had come to naught. We had given various secret weapons to our young men trained in Xi'an and Fuyang, and even made promises with the American War Department for a plan to put them on American submarines in Shandong, to enter our home country, destroy or occupy key points, and then transport weapons by American plane. But before we could even try it once, the Japanese surrendered. It is truly a pity for our military contribution, but more worrying than that is the thought that because we did nothing in this war, our voice in international affairs will be weak in the future. Having no heart to stay longer, I immediately left Mr. Zhu's house. By the time my car reached the main road, the streets were already a sea of people, and the sound of cheers shook the city. I declined all the welcome parties prepared for me in Xi'an and immediately returned to Duke. Upon arrival, I found our Restoration Army in a somber atmosphere, disappointed that the war had ended without them performing their mission, while the American instructors and soldiers were jumping for joy, almost losing their sense of order. The construction of barracks to accommodate thousands of our Restoration Army soldiers, for which they had been transporting timber from Zhongnan Mountain and bricks from the kilns, all stopped at once from that day. The purpose of my trip this time was to send our soldiers trained in Xi'an as the first group to our home country, then go to Fuyang to send those trained there as the second group, and then return to Chongqing. But all those plans had turned into bubbles. When I came from Chongqing, I had taken a military plane, but when I returned there, I took a passenger plane. Back in Chongqing, I found the Chinese people already in a state of confusion as the tension of the war had loosened, and our compatriots were in a situation where they did not know where to turn. The provisional government had convened the Provisional Legislative Assembly during that time. Some insisted on the collective resignation of the state councilors of the provisional government, and others proposed dissolving it and entering our home country. No conclusion had been reached, and upon hearing the news that I, the chairman, was returning, they had adjourned for 3 days. I went to the assembly and declared that both dissolution and collective resignation were absolutely improper. I insisted that it was right to continue as we were until we entered Seoul and presented the government before all the people, and I obtained the unanimous consent of the members. However, the American side said that since there was an American military government in Seoul, they could not permit the entry of the provisional government, so we should come as individuals. Thus, we had no choice but to decide to return to our motherland as individuals. As my 7 years of life in Chongqing came to an end, I am truly overcome with emotion, and it is difficult to find where to begin my words. I took a sedan chair, went to my mother's grave and my son In's tomb at Huaxiang Mountain across the river, laid flowers, and read a ritual prayer to bid farewell. I called the gravekeeper, gave him generous gifts, and asked him to guard them. Then I bought 8 leather boxes, packed all the government documents, and set measures for the 500 or so compatriots residing in Chongqing. To maintain contact with the Chinese government after the provisional government returned to its home country, I established a representative office in China and appointed Park Chanik as the head, and Min Pil-ho, Yi Guang, Yi Sangman, and Kim Yun-chung as members. As we were about to leave Chongqing, Zhou Enlai, Dong Biwu, and others from the headquarters of the Communist Party of China invited all the members of the Provisional Government State Council for a farewell banquet. From the central government and the Kuomintang, over 200 key figures from the government, the party, and various circles, led by Mr. and Mrs. Chiang Kai-shek, gathered and invited our Provisional Government State Councilors and the executives of the Korean Independence Party to the Grand Hall of the Kuomintang Central Headquarters. They held a solemn and sincere farewell banquet, with the Chinese flag and the Taegukgi crossed. Chairman Chiang Kai-shek and Madame Sung Mei-ling were the first to stand and gave congratulatory speeches wishing for the eternal happiness of China and Korea, and our side gave a reply. Before recording the events of leaving Chongqing, I wish to write down a few unforgettable things from my 7 years of life there. First, regarding the life of our compatriots in Chongqing. Chongqing was originally a small city with only a few tens of thousands of people. But after the central government moved here, officials and refugees from regions occupied by the Japanese army flocked here, and it suddenly became a large city with a population of over 1 million. No matter how many new houses were built, they could not accommodate everyone, so in the summer, hundreds of thousands of people slept outdoors. Food was rationed, and there was always a long line in front of the rationing stations, and there was never a time when disputes did not occur through mutual insults and blows. However, our compatriots were particularly selective about their numbers and received rations as a group. We had servants distribute them to each house, which was very convenient, and we even swept our yards. Servants were also used to draw water for drinking. Not only the compatriots living in the city of Chongqing, but also those living in Tuqiao in the suburbs formed a Korean village and were able to maintain a life at the level of the Chinese middle class. Although there were occasional complaints of shortage, we were able to maintain a disciplined and safe communal life. My own life in Chongqing could be said to be the work of carrying the provisional government and fleeing, with eating and sleeping done in the intervals. As the bombing of Chongqing became increasingly severe, the provisional government moved 4 times. The first government building on Yangliu Street could not withstand the bombing, so we moved to Shipanga. After this house was completely destroyed by a fire caused by bombing, burning even our clothes, we went to Wusaya Alley. This house was also hit and collapsed, and though we repaired it, it could not be used as a government building and was made into a residence for staff. For the 4th time, we obtained a house of over 70 rooms at Lianhuachi, Lotus Pond, and the rent was 400,000 yuan a year. However, this money was supplemented by Chairman Chang, and we used this house until the provisional government left Chongqing. Due to the continuous bombing, the loss of life and property in Chongqing was immense. Among our compatriots, those who died were the nephew of Mr. Sin Ik-hui and the wife of Kim Yong-rin. The bombing in which these 2 compatriots died was the most severe. It was at this time that a single air raid shelter produced 400 or 800 suffocated victims. I witnessed the scene of transporting those bodies. As the bodies were loaded like cargo onto trucks, and the trucks ran, there were times when bodies shook and fell off. Being too troublesome to reload them, they would tie the necks and attach them to the back of the truck, and the bodies would be dragged over the ground, tumbling over and over. Regardless of whether they were men or women, the clothes of the bodies were all torn and their flesh was exposed, which was the trace of struggling against each other to get ahead. While there were people wailing on one side for having lost their family in this manner, on the other side, there were workers pulling bodies out of the air raid shelters who searched the gold and silver treasures the bodies had possessed and became suddenly wealthy. Because it was Jiaxing, famous for having many prostitutes, that such a disaster of suffocation occurred. The majority of the dead were prostitutes. The old name of Chongqing is Ba. Now it is called Pachok, along with Shu, which is called Chengdu. It is an important port where 1,000-ton steamships dock, as the Jialing River flows to the left of the city and joins the Yangtze River coming from the right. It is called Ba because in olden times a person named General Ba had his capital here. At Lianhuachi, there is the tomb of General Ba. The climate of Chongqing is very bad for health, so there are many respiratory diseases. In 7 years, 80 of our compatriots died of tuberculosis. From early September to April of the following year, there is much fog and mist, so it is rare to see stars. Being a low-lying, hollow land, the stench of the ground does not disperse, and the air is very foul. My eldest son also became a victim of this climate and is buried in Chongqing. On November 5th, the staff and state councilors of our provisional government split into 2 planes and left Chongqing. After 5 hours, we stepped onto the soil of Shanghai for the first time in 13 years. The airfield where our plane landed was none other than Hongkou New Park, and the place was overflowing with men and women compatriots who had come to welcome us. I had lived in Shanghai for 14 years, but I had never set foot in Hongkou Park. When we were about to leave the new park and enter the city, 6,000 compatriots who had been waiting for us since 6 in the morning were waiting in line. I stood on a platform that was over a gill, the height of a man, high, and gave a greeting to the compatriots. As I found out later, that platform was the very place where the Japanese had built a platform to commemorate the event and command the troops after martyr Yoon Bong-gil had bombed General Shirakawa and others 13 years ago. I thought to myself that nothing in the world is a mere coincidence. I stayed at the Yangtze Hotel. 13 years was a long time in a person's life. Those who were still children when I left Shanghai had already become grown men, and those who were grown men had become old and infirm. I met with old comrades who had kept their integrity cleanly without wavering for all this time. Sonu Hyuk, Jang Deokro, So Byung-ho, Han Jin-gyo, Jo Bong-gil, Yi Yong-hwan, Ha Sang-rin, Han Baek-won, and Won Ugwan, and had dinner together at So Byung-ho's house and took a commemorative photo. On the other hand, the word that there were not a few among the compatriots residing in Shanghai who were in dishonest professions saddened me. I hope that our compatriots will engage honestly in legitimate professions wherever they go and have the patriotism to raise the credit and prestige of our nation. I visited my wife's grave in the French Concession Cemetery, and after staying in Shanghai for about 10 days, I left Shanghai for my home country on an American plane. It was a regret that people like Yi Dong-nyong and Hyonik Chol were buried in a foreign land and could not return to their motherland together. With a heart where joy and sorrow were entangled, I breathed the fresh air of my motherland for the first time in 27 years and stepped on the beloved soil. It was Gimpo Airfield, 3 hours after leaving Shanghai. As soon as I entered the land of my motherland, I felt one joy and one sorrow. The sight of the students carrying their book bags, appearing very active and cheerful, was one joy. On the contrary, the sight of the houses where the compatriots lived, crouching flat on the ground and appearing quite poor, was one sorrow. It was said that the compatriots had gathered for several days to welcome us, but because the arrival time of the plane was not clearly known, there were not many compatriots to greet us on this day. Leaning my old body on a car and entering Seoul, the familiar mountains and rivers welcomed me gladly. My lodging was the house of Mr. Choi Chang-hak outside Saemun. The state council party stayed at the Hanmi Hotel, which the local leaders who welcomed us had prepared in advance. I soon expressed my wish through the newspapers to meet the bereaved families of the two martyrs, Yoon Bong-gil and Yi Bong-chang, and of Mr. Kim Joo-gyung of Gangwon. Since Martyr Yoon's son, Yoon Tae, was north of the 38th parallel, I could not see him, but his daughter and relatives came from Gangwon, or Gimpo, to meet me, which was both joyful and sad. However, because of the barrier of the so-called 38th parallel, I could not go to my beloved hometown, where the graves of my ancestors were and where my relatives and old friends lived. Instead, my cousins and the families of my female cousins came up to Seoul, and we were able to meet gladly. The various agencies and political parties, social organizations, the educational field, and factories belonging to the military government office formed a joint welcome committee without exception. Though we had entered as individuals, hundreds of thousands of compatriots held a large demonstration march through the streets of Seoul, holding high flags with "Welcome to the Provisional Government" written in large letters alongside the Taegukgi. At the end, over 400 dining tables were prepared for a welcome banquet at Deoksugung Palace. Major General Hodge and other American military government officials also attended, and the courtyard of Deoksugung was nearly too narrow for the crowd. It was truly a brilliant and grand welcome party. I felt ashamed and sorry for not having any merit to deserve such a welcome, but I received it gratefully, thinking that the compatriots were consoling us for having suffered long overseas. Before I knew it, the year changed. I decided to tour at least the area south of the 38th parallel and went to Incheon as my first journey. Incheon is a meaningful place in my life. At 22, I was sentenced to death in Incheon prison. At 23, I broke out and fled. And at 41, as a prisoner for 17 years, I was imprisoned in this prison again. That harbor is soaked with my blood and sweat. On the road my parents must have walked for this unfilial so. And in prison, their tearful traces seem to remain, making the memories from 49 years ago as fresh as if they were yesterday. I received a great welcome from the citizens in Incheon as well. As my second journey, I visited Magok Temple in Gongju. Upon arrival in Gongju, over 100,000 compatriots gathered from 11 counties of South Chungcheong Province and held a meeting to welcome me. On the way from Gongju to Magok Temple, I visited the place where the portraits of the two masters Kim Bok-han and Choi Ik-hyun were enshrined, paid my respects, consoled their bereaved families, and gratefully received the sincere welcome of the villagers. There were over 350 people following me to Magok Temple as representatives of political parties and social organizations. The representative of the monks of Magok Temple came out as far as Gongju to meet me, and at the entrance of Magok Temple, monks and nuns lined up and welcomed me with all their heart. It was because they thought that a monk who was once in this temple was returning as the chairman of a nation. It was the road I used to frequent 48 years ago, wearing a wide bamboo hat and a rosary around my neck. The mountains and rivers were the same as before, and the Juryen, couplets written on pillars, hung on the Great Hero Hall were also just as they were of old. Gakre Gwansegen, Yuyo Mongjongsa. Stepping back and looking at the world, it is like something in a dream. I had looked at these words casually back then, but seeing them in detail today, it seemed they were words referring to me. I spent a meaningful night in the Yomwasil where I used to learn the Bokgak Sojang from the monk Yongdam. The monks offered prayers for me that night. However, there was no one among the monks whom I had known. The next morning, I planted a rose of Sharon, Mugungwa, and a juniper tree as a commemoration and left Magok Temple. As my third journey, I visited the home of Martyr Yoon Bong-gil. Since it was April 29th, a commemorative rite was held, and I asked my comrade Park Yeol, who was in Tokyo, Japan, to bring the remains of the three martyrs, Yoon Bong-gil, Yi Bong-chang, and Baekbeomilji, to their home country. On the day the remains arrived in Busan, I went by special train all the way to Busan. Needless to say, for Busan, at every station where the train carrying the remains of the three stopped, social and educational organizations and the general public gathered and held memorial ceremonies. Upon arrival in Seoul, the coffins containing the remains were enshrined at Taego Temple to make it easy for compatriots to pay their respects, and it was decided to bury them in a place within Hyochang Park that I personally chose. I left a place to enshrine the remains of martyr An Jung-gun at the very top, and then planned to bury the remains of the three martyrs in order. On this day, the American military government officials also all attended. It was planned for the American Army to be dispatched as well, but that was canceled. Korean police, land and sea guard units, political parties, organizations, educational institutions, and factory workers all turned out, and general compatriots gathered like clouds, forming a sea of people from Taego Temple to Hyochang Park, temporarily blocking traffic for streetcars, cars, and even pedestrians. In the lead was a musical band playing morning music, followed by floral wreaths and funeral banners. The hearses of the three martyrs were accompanied by a group of female students. It was a grander funeral than the royal funerals of old. On my way touring the southern provinces, I visited the Kim family village in Doknyang-ri, Doknyang-myeon, Bosong County. It was the place where I had stayed for 3 months while in exile 48 years ago, and the Kim family were of the same clan as me. Hearing rumors that I was coming, they even set up a pine gate at the entrance of the village, and paved the road. Men and women of the village came out to the entrance and lined up to welcome me. I visited the house of Kim Gwang-eon, where I had stayed. The house was the same as before, but the owner had already passed away. Receiving the welcome of the bereaved family, they said they would provide a meal in the place where I used to receive a table back then. They set up a folding screen on the veranda, laid a clean mat, and had me sit. Among those who gathered, the only ones who recognized me were an old woman and a clansman named Kim Pan-nam. Mr. Kim brought a book I had written with my own hand at that time and showed it to me. Mr. Seon, who was the same age as me and with whom I had been particularly close while staying here, had already passed away. His wife, who had sewn a brush pouch and given it to me as a parting gift, came out from Bosong-yup with her descendants to welcome me. The lady was also said to be the same age as me. On the way from Gwangju to Naju, the compatriots of Hampyeong blocked the way and asked me to stop by, so I went to Hampyeong-yup, gave a speech at a welcome party held at a school playground, and then went to Naju. When I asked for the house of Scholar Yi of Yukmojong in Naju, I was told that Scholar Yi's house was not in Naju but in Hampyeong, which I had just passed through, and that the person who led the cheers for me at the Hampyeong welcome party was Scholar Yi's grandson. Over the long years, I had mixed up Hampyeong and Naju. Afterward, the grandson of Scholar Yi, it is said he became a royal secretary after parting with me. Jae-sung and Jae-hyuk, the two brothers, came to see me in Seoul with gifts, so I apologized for misremembering Hampyeong as Naju and failing to find them. On this journey, I stopped by Gimhae, and it happened to be the autumn ritual for King Suro's tomb. While many of the Kim and Heo families were participating, I also participated for the first time in my life wearing an official hat and belt, which they had prepared for me. In Jeonju, it was a joy to meet the three: Mangmun, the son of my old friend Kim Hyung-jin, his cousin Mang-yeol, and his maternal cousin Choi Gyung-ryol. After the general welcome party in Jeonju ended, I gathered with the families of these three, reminisced about the late friend, and took a commemorative photo. When I asked for news of Gong Jong-ryol in Ganggyong, I was told that he had committed suicide while young and had no descendants, and the tragedy of the day I slept at that house was something that had occurred among relatives. Afterward, I visited the house of Mr. Kim Ju-gyong of Ganghwa, took a photo with his relatives, and met a person who said he was one of the 30 students I was teaching at that time. While touring Kaesong, Yonnan, and other places, I visited the tomb of the filial son Yi on the way. Gohyojai Changmei Jimyo, tomb of the late filial son Yi Changmei. Thinking of the old days 49 years ago, when I rested in front of this tombstone on the way being dragged from Haeju prison to Incheon prison, I bowed before the grave, found by estimation the place where my mother had sat that day, and threw my body upon it. However, since there was no way to see Mother's face, my vision grew dark. I reminisced about her final words as she passed away in Chongqing. What shall I do about my resentful thoughts? Would it not have been her resentment that she could not return to her motherland together with her son and talk about the past after achieving the goal of independence? But thinking of her lying together with her grandson in a corner of that far, far western Huaxiang mountain, I could not help but feel sorrow. If her soul could return to her motherland and even just see the welcome I receive from the compatriots, would not mother's heart be somewhat comforted? Reminiscing about the old days of Master Cho Guang-ok and Magistrate John Bong-hoon in Paicheon, and when I paid my CTS at the tomb of King Gyeongsun, my ancestor, at Gorangpo in Jangdan, the Kims living in the village near the tomb had prepared a ritual table, knowing that I was coming. I lay down my brush for now, waiting for the day of the great country of Korea's independent sovereignty to continue this writing. Outside Saemun Seoul. That is all for the story I have prepared for today. I lay down my brush for now, waiting for the day of the great country of Korea's independent sovereignty to continue this writing. The final sentence left by the teacher scatters deeply and poignantly into the quiet night air. Thanks to the earnest waiting and the hearts of so many people over a long time, it seems we are able to go to bed in such peace tonight. You've worked truly hard today. I hope you lay down all the heavy burdens or worries remaining in your heart into the darkness of the night. Slow night, ancient tales. Thank you for staying with me until the end today. I hope you have deep and comfortable dreams without any worries. Sleep well. Have a good night.